Hello everyone! Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, the arts, and more. I am Ito Utini.
And I'm Makaya Utini, and today we're here with Susan Kougell. Susan is an award-winning writer and filmmaker. Her solo films are available at the Filmmakers Co-Op and are screening internationally, and her 6 short films with Ernie Marrero are in MoMA's permanent collection and archives. Susan has combined her passion for music and poetry in her choral texts and compositions. She teaches at Purchase College, SUNY, and serves as a senior contributing editor for Script magazine. We're delighted to have her with us today. Before we begin, I've got a quick announcement for our listeners. We're curating resources for artists and writers on our blog. It's completely free. Check it out at thedatekeepers.com and feel free to reach out anytime and let us know what other resources you want us to build. Also, we'd really appreciate if you'd subscribe, like, comment, and share this podcast with your friends and on your socials so we can reach more people and do more for the creative community. Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell us about you and your work.
Well, I'm first of all so happy to be speaking to both of you today. So I'm a writer and filmmaker and based in New York City. My work for myself, what I do for my art, is doing experimental narrative films. And coming out of poetry, I'm still writing poetry and also incorporating photo collage. So that's really my passion. I teach screenwriting at State University of New York College at Purchase and do script consulting. And I write for Script magazine, where mostly what I do is do interviews with writers and filmmakers, and most recently covered the Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland. So that's my quick bio here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to filmmaking and your style as a filmmaker? Because your films are very text heavy. They don't rely much on audio. They don't rely much on traditional narrative. So can you talk about where that style came from and how it developed and what your influences are?
Yeah, so when I started writing, it was poetry. And one of the early films that I did with a partner was all text-based. And what became really an inspiration for me was having control over the text, how long it appears on screen, the size of the text, having multiple narratives, and challenging the viewer in this way. And also another influence, I guess, is that I'm a classically trained violist, and my background as a musician and what always gave me security as a writer was that structure that I learned playing orchestral music. So I think that was kind of the influence of the structure of using words in film. And I think it's all about control and manipulation of text and image. That's what it really comes down to. And sometimes, slowing things down with text or going so fast. I know some responses I've had to my films where people said, but the text is moving so fast. I said, yes, I know it's intentional. It's to get the viewer out of their comfort zone.
Well, it seems to invite, we live in this era where a lot of us view film mainly on our laptops, and it seems to invite pausing. And I guess you can pause and rewind on a traditional VHS or any medium, but it's so easy on a laptop. Just click pause and then rewind it. Like, are your films designed for that medium, or is that just happenstance?
No, they weren't designed that way. Originally, when I started out 30, 40 years ago making experimental narrative poetic films, there was no internet. So no, that was not the intention, but that raises an interesting point. Yeah. What I'm often interested in is that when they're shown in a gallery space, whether they're projected on the wall or on the screen, the viewer can walk by the film and stop if they want or move on to the next one.
Is originality something that you place a high premium on in your work?
Absolutely. I don't do adaptations. I may be inspired by things that I've read or experiences, but absolute original work that's very important. Yeah.
So then where does your inspiration come from?
I think partly family history. That's where I kind of started out when I made films, and now through the last couple of years, I started working on a project that was about, so my great aunt, Teresa Giese, was a well-known German actress. She was born in the late 1800s, so she, with Erika Mann, Thomas Mann's daughter, started the Pfeffermühl Playhouse. They were in theater. She was really groundbreaking as an actress and also as an activist, and stood up as a Jewish woman who was gay, really stood up for people who were being discriminated against. And so she was in exile, fled Germany, married a gay man just to get out of the country, and had this quite extraordinary life. And I was just always fascinated by her. And a few years ago, two women reached out to me and to my late mother about doing a podcast about her that was in the going to be part of a project at a museum in Munich. And that really sparked my interest to even dig deeper. And that it was a wonderful experience to speak to them. And so I started doing research and uncovered more about my family and so forth. And so that's what I've been working on the last couple of years, on and off. I got some support from my university to work on it. But as it evolved, as often it does when we're writing and making art, it leads you into different directions. So yeah, it's been very exciting. And I'm a first generation American, and my mother was a Holocaust survivor, as were my grandparents. So it's been a tremendous influence on my work and my life. So that's really at the fundamental of what's important to me, is just kind of keeping that voice going.
So when you start to put a film together, do you have a message in mind, something that you want to convey? And I ask because it seems that your films are built around creating opportunities for viewers to interpret things that they see or think they see or read or think they read, and they're not necessarily directed toward one defined interpretation. So do you typically have an interpretation that you hope the viewers will settle on, or is the whole point to allow them to project something onto the images and text that they're experiencing?
I think it's both. Each film is different in that way. So one, I may feel very intentional about how I want their viewer to respond. Again, in a perfect world, how I would like them to respond. And other times it's open to interpretation. So I may be thinking, for example, or writing about a certain subject matter that I feel very passionate about. And my goal is to be thought-provoking, and often with a sense of humor, because I think that's really important, because I want to engage the viewer, and I don't want the viewer to always feel like, oh, you know, she's telling us to think this way. I want them to come with their own interpretation.
You're also a violist, a classically trained violist. Can you talk a little bit about how that shows up in your work? How do you draw on that?
I think very specifically it's about structure. To sound really geeky and obnoxious, I mean, I played with the youth orchestra, and when I was 13, we were doing Mahler's Fifth, which I really had no business doing. But I was so involved. I was studying the score and my piece, and I was memorizing sections. And I think this idea of structure and rhythm and timing and the beats and all of that for me just translated into my writing, whether it was poetry or prose and filmmaking, because so much of filmmaking for me was about rhythm and pacing. And I also edit my own films. So all of that, I mean, I really see that going hand in hand, although I don't play anymore. It was just a tremendous influence.
It's so interesting because your films are so heavy on silence. It makes me think of John Cage, but there's not a soundtrack typically, so it's interesting that music is such a heavy influence. If you had to point to a certain era in musical history or a certain musical genre or subgenre, what would you say your films correspond to?
It's interesting that you said John Cage, because when I first started making films, he was a tremendous influence, as was Merce Cunningham. And I was reading, what was the first John Cage book I read? Now I'm blanking out. It's on my shelf, but I can't see it from where I'm sitting. Anyway, but I think more the classical musicians like Mahler and Brahms, I was playing them. So I think that was a big influence for me. My father was a violist, as were his siblings, were also musicians, and his parents, my grandmother and grandfather, were child prodigy pianists, and my grandfather was a composer. And so it was a big influence. I was surrounded by it all the time, and so I was very fortunate.
Do you think that's because I think sometimes there's a challenge, because in order to know what's original, because you mentioned originality as was one of your prime values, in order to know what's original, you do have to immerse yourself in like the bodies of work that have been generated already. But at the same time, whenever you immerse yourself, you risk absorbing so much that then whatever you're putting out is just a reformulation of whatever you've taken in. So how do you balance that? How do you ensure that what you're creating it departs from what you've absorbed sufficiently so that you feel that it's yours?
It's a really good question, because, right, does it become part of the collective unconscious? So, I mean, that whole idea of, what is an original idea? Is there an original idea? I'm conscious of it, and I can only say that with my writing, my work, that I think it's a specific quirky sensibility. I think I often fight against that, and I think, most artists do. It's like, oh, I've come up with this brilliant new idea, and then you read something or hear something, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that sounds kind of familiar. So again, it's not about plagiarism, but I think it's, sometimes the collective unconscious, what are we picking up in the background of music, for example? And then, or something that you're hearing on the radio with somebody reading something from a chapter of a book, and do those words somehow infiltrate my own work? So, yeah.
Well, at the very least, you're very likely the only person, or one of the very few people, who was reading that thing, listening to that thing, and having whatever experiences you were having at that particular time in that particular combination. So there's probably going to be something distinctive that comes out of that particular convergence of influences.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's the more conscious it becomes, the more challenging it is to meet whatever standard of originality you set for yourself, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also most of us in art making practice are coming from a specific vantage point, whether it's family history, experience, where you live, and so forth. So I guess, that's part of it also.
If we ask you to choose one of your projects that is your very favorite, which one and why?
Oh, when I went back and started making films after a long break of making my own films. I was a writer for hire on other films. It wasn't that I wasn't involved in making films, but just making them my own. I think for me, going back was my short film called Barbie Dreamhouse. I still feel very passionate about it. And it did get a lot of attention at one festivals and has had many screenings, but it was just very meaningful to me. And it was a film that I had written sections over a period of time. So it wasn't like I sat down and wrote it from beginning to end. I had written sections and then put the pieces together, but I always knew what it was going to look like. It was in my head for a very long time. So I know that film has been very impactful, the response that I've had from people. And then maybe this also the second film, which was only text, was the second film that I made with a partner when I was a student at SUNY Purchase. So so those are the two films.
Can you share?
Yeah.
Can you share what these two films are about?
So the first film, which has a very long title, and again, because I even then had my sense of humor, even though it's an incredibly serious, poignant, important film, called One Day Franz Brought Me to His House. And there are three simultaneous narratives going on that appear in the film, 20-minute film. And one narrative is about my family's history during World War II in the Netherlands. Another narrative was more present day of when I was living in Europe and in a specific experience that happened that paralleled to my family's time. And then a third narrative that was more like the ticker that they would run on the bottom of the television, about like a news report, that had to do with what was happening in Europe at that time, late 1970s, it was 1970s, 1979, 1980, which had to do with the Baader Meinhof gang and kidnapping. And so just the interweaving of narratives and using specific historical information and also making it personal. And then with Barbie Dreamhouse, which I did, 6 years ago, that was coincidentally not in, or who knows, again, the collective unconscious, when the whole Me Too movement was getting a lot of attention. So it was concerning women's stories, fact, fiction, just brief snippets of women's experiences of being whether assaulted or oppressed, and the conditioning of women, and using the actual, I still have my paper, the cardboard Barbie Dreamhouse, which is what I filmed. It's part of it. So I think those two films, so history is important to me, and, contextualizing it in that way. So,
is there anything else you would like to share?
I think this, is to keep writing, to keep building community like the two of you are doing. It's essential.
Yes.
I think it's survival, right? At least for me it is. And I so appreciate what the two of you do. And I was doing a lot of reading about your work, and I look forward to reading more. And
hey, we look forward to putting more out there, and we look forward to talking to more people like you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.